Welcome everyone, Costin here with my campaign guide for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires for the Dark Elves. I picked up my Malekith campaign guide, continued it for quite a few more turns, and now I'm turning it into a race guide for the Dark Elves in their entirety. I decided to use Malekith as the template for this because he's the most generic of the Legendary Lords that the Dark Elves have. He is also the weakest of the Legendary Lords, largely due to his start position, but I'll get into the Dark Elven Legendary Lords in just a bit. Just a note that I am recording this in patch 2.3, which came out today, but this campaign was started with patch 2.2, though there are some changes that do affect the Dark Elves. How much that affects me, that's a different discussion. But there are some substantial changes that have been made with patch 2.3, some very substantial changes. Specifically with the economic building, you used to lose like 80 slaves at tier 3, now you're losing 60 at most, and then the ports are requiring significantly fewer slaves than they did before. Now, before I continue, I do need to mention that I am looking to start a new series focusing on improving player campaigns. If you're interested in having someone take a look at your campaign, giving you tips to improve on it, send it via the link, via the email in the description of this video, and I'm looking forward to seeing what campaigns people have that they're interested in someone looking at them. Now, let's talk a bit about the Dark Elves. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Well, they're kind of the opposite of the High Elves. The High Elves may not necessarily be the strongest race early on in the game, but they are certainly one of the strongest later on in the game. The reason the High Elves are so good is because they have scalability in their economy, scalability in their military. They got a lot of good research, etc. That's how the High Elves work. The Dark Elves are a bit different. They're not so strong from my perspective later on in the game, though they certainly can hold their own very well, but they are far stronger early on in the campaign, if you know what you're doing. The thing I would say about the Dark Elves is they're strong, but they're not ridiculous levels of strength, like, say, for instance, the Greenskins, the Vampire Counts, the Warriors of Chaos, even the High Elves. They're not the kind of race where you're just going to put in zero effort in your campaign past a certain point and just win with relative ease. You do actually need to make some choices, and that's actually why I like them so much, because they're not the steamroller race. They're a race where you need to constantly manage your empire, constantly have to think about things. One of their main mechanics is slaves. Slaves give you significant benefits to construction time, so reducing the construction time of your empire, construction cost, income from old buildings, and this scales up dependent on the number of slaves. Like if I got over 5,000 slaves, these would improve. If I got fewer than that, these would decrease. These benefits would decrease. So it is a scalability. This is where the scalability comes in. But here's the thing. You do suffer for this because of that control downside. And Dark Elves can have quite a few issues with control. But their benefits are that they can build up far faster than anyone else due to the construction time benefit. And they also have benefits in terms of army recruitments, though there's also downsides. But they are, and they gain a lot of money through looting, sacking, post-battle loot in general, but they may not have the same baseline economy as other races because, for instance, compared to the High Elves, they don't get as much income from trade because they don't get all the trade tariff benefits and the trade resources. Though they can still gain a decent amount of income from trade. For instance, in this campaign, I'm generating 6,000 from trade, but much of that, the vast majority of my economy is either background income, baseline income basically, or building income from regular buildings. One of the things to also mention, one of the big downsides of the Dark Elven economy is that it requires slaves to function well. So I might be earning a lot of building income, but if I go below the slave threshold, so for instance with the port, if I have less than 100 slaves in my faction, then the port will generate 50 less income. And that's at tier 1. At tier 2, 200 less. For instance, the Nagaron port, the main economic building, 100 less income, and they do consume slaves to operate. The resource buildings don't, but they're the main economic buildings, the guild halls, do consume slaves to operate. They will still generate a good amount of income by default, but a substantial income benefit can be gained by having slaves. So you always need to worry about the slave economy. Without it, your economy is going to be much weaker. And I think I would lose like half of my economic, well, maybe not quite half, but let's say over a third, certainly. I'll lose a third of my economic output if I went below 100 slaves. And yes, that can happen quite often. In fact, you might not be so, in fact, for instance, every single turn right now, I'm spending 1,800 slaves, or I was, just for the buildings. And of course, I'm also spending slaves per right. Slaves are used for rights, various rights. One of the most powerful ones, with the exception of Loki or Fellheart, is to summon a Black Ark. This is the second big benefit that the Dark Elves do have, beyond just getting a lot of money through the slave trade, for looting and sacking settlements. One of the big benefits is with their Black Arks. See, Black Arks are floating cities, and like the Great Bastion, Black Arks can maintain units for very cheap. So a level 1 Black Ark will give you a 50% upkeep benefit. A level 5 Black Ark will give you a 60% upkeep benefit. And this can go even further, because for instance the Warrior Hall, the main building chain, the main barracks chain, will further decrease this by 6%, for instance. And other building chains will do that for their respective units as well. They also give other benefits as well, like slaves per turn, income from post-battle loot in the Circle of Influence that you can see here. They're essentially mobile ogre camps. Yeah. You know how ogre camps are mediocre because they can't be moved? Black Arks can. You do have a limit of them. You can only get one for most lords every 25 turns, unless you're playing Loki or Fellheart. But you can gain still a decent amount of them. Like for instance, here I have one over here with a couple of units with an army next to them. And then I have another one over here. And then a third to the north, like this is turn 64. So I've managed to get 3 Black Arks so far in this campaign. I'm gonna get 4 Black Arks. And now, you obviously want to protect them, because if you lose a Black Ark, that is a major issue. Though I don't think the Black Ark loses its level. So instead, if it gets destroyed, you just have to recruit it again. But you are dependent on the Black Arks. The downside of this is that although Black Arks themselves have their own unique recruitment slot, so each Black Ark gives you recruitment capacity, and it's for the units that you can recruit from Black Arks. So for instance, here I can get quite a few these units over here, like Medusae, Corsairs, Reaper Bolt Throwers, etc. The downside that the Dark Elves do have, and it is a major issue, is that they have no global recruitment, and they have very limited recruitment slots. I don't believe there is any way to really increase that except for research, some research. As far as I know, I haven't seen a structure. I don't think there is a structure, except, okay, so the Palace of the Dread Knights would give you 1 and then into 2, so you could get 4, but still the number of recruitment slots is limited for the Dark Elves by quite a significant amount. And because they don't have global recruitment, they are heavily dependent on the Black Arks. The Black Arks, however, they have the downside that they can't obviously move inland. They can go for rivers, but there's a lot of territory, for instance, if I toggle Fog of War over here, that they can't, like if I wanted to conquer the Empire, just theoretically, you wouldn't do it as the Dark Elves, but if I wanted to conquer the Empire, then I would be having to move armies deep into their territory, without the support of the Black Arks. And the Dark Elves are balanced around the idea that they have the Black Arks to support them. Without them, they are significantly weaker. The Black Arks also provide artillery support, so these abilities right here, which you can also upgrade with certain buildings over here that can give you, like, you can replace the abilities and just make them stronger than the ones that are by default. But yeah, there are obviously many pros, but also many cons with the Dark Elves. They are a strong race. They earn a lot of money through taking a settlement. So for instance here, just to give you, okay, so that wouldn't work. Malekith, actually, because I think Malekith would be able to win his battle. So, okay, yes, I will lose some units, but whatever. But he would earn from sacking the Gaean Vale 50,000. If I just take it over, it's 20,000. I might want to do so because it's tier 5. So it would get reduced to tier 4, and I may want to do that. Alright, all very well and good. And I've just gained a ridiculous amount of money. If I had sacked it, that would have been even better for him. But the Dark Elves can gain a lot of money from sacking settlements, but their baseline economy may not be as strong. The reason this is a good thing because it allows you to recruit to get a lot of structures, a lot of units, heroes, all that very quickly. The downside is you might get in over your head. The reason I say that is you might get multiple armies very quickly, but you won't be able to, you won't have sustainability for those armies as quickly as you might think. So, and on top of that, it will increase your strength rating. For instance, here on this campaign, I'm strength rank number 1. I certainly haven't put a lot of effort in this, by the way. And because of that, a lot of factions will be more hostile to you, because the stronger you are, the more hostile factions get to you. But if you start getting involved in a lot of wars, your territory gets raided, etc., you might end up in an economic collapse as Dark Elves. You might earn a lot of money from individual battles, but you don't necessarily have the same kind of sustainability as some other factions may have to support a lot of armies. You can recruit them in the first place, but you may not be able to sustain them. Depends on where you are in your campaign and what you're dealing with, if that's an issue or not, but it can be a major problem for them. So benefits in terms of recruitment, downsides in terms of recruitment, benefits in terms of economy with the huge amount of income from looting, post-battle loot, sacking settlements, but also downsides in the baseline economy that Dark Elves do have. Benefits from slaves, but significant issues with public order, with control, because the slaves are going to affect your control by -3 in all provinces. So for instance, over here, let's look at this region. I've had this for a while. So difficulty is going to give you -8. Income is got -4. And then you get slaves, and slaves will be -2 most of the time, -3, -4 even, as you get further into a campaign. So you can be looking at a -16 control level for the Dark Elves. And that's without counting on things like provincial instability and the like. The rebellions aren't too common in Warhammer 3, but the Dark Elves can certainly struggle with that. Their main control building just won't necessarily provide enough control to deal with that. Another unique aspect is their dictats. They use slaves, so you might be using slaves, but you can get the 20 control one, 2 control, or a lot of growth. But the Dark Elves are less of a slow, steady faction, but more like a rush faction, if you will. They're a faction that rewards aggression. They're a faction that rewards a player constantly on the move, but they don't have the most stable empire behind them. That's probably the best way to describe them. There are some mods, obviously. The public order penalty mod would make your life a lot easier if you're playing the Dark Elves, a Dark Elven faction. But even so, rebellions, low public order, and implicitly issues with growth can all be problems in the Dark Elf campaign. Though you can get pretty decent growth with buildings, and with research, one of your early research gives you 10 growth. You can get 15 extra if you want. I didn't find that particularly necessary, really. But yeah, pros and cons. So I like this because I think it makes a campaign more interesting when you're not having a free ride, when you actually have to constantly manage things. But for some people, that constant management of public order, of dictats, of slaves may be a hassle. But it is fun. It is genuinely fun to play them from my perspective. Regarding their legendary lords, taking them in the order as they're listed in the selection screen, Malekith is the worst. The reason he's the worst is not that he doesn't have some significant benefits in both battle and campaign. He does. He gets that loyalty benefit, diplomatic relations with other Dark Elves, a control benefit, always useful construction benefit, a pretty significant upkeep benefit for quite a few units, though they're not the most important units that you're actually going to use. So it's less important than you might think. Because yes, Dread Spears, Blade Swords, and Dark Shards are units that you will be using in your campaign. Well, at least Dread Spears and Dark Shards. They're not the units you're actually going to be looking to mass, but I'll talk about unit recruitment in just a bit. But the main thing that holds Malekith back is not Lord effects being weak or anything like that, though they're not especially superb either. It's his starting position. He's got Grombrindle to the west, Valkia to the north. To the east, he's got Hellebron, which actually may be hostile against him. He's got the Sisters of Twilight, Koptep, all that, and Tarox to the south. And then he's got the blob of High Elves, including Alifanar, who despises him so much he's the kind of lord who might even ally chaos to kill Malekith. That's how much Alifanar hates you. You're surrounded by a vast number of enemies. You can make it work. I've done an entire campaign guide with Malekith, but he is by far the weakest. He has the hardest start. He has the fewest. He has some of the weaker benefits of all of them. He's really just a generic lord in a lot of ways. Some benefits, upkeep benefits, construction benefits, etc. But compared to what some of the others provide you, yeah, he is by far the weakest. He is good in battle. Personally, he's got magic, he's got melee strength, but he just has a lot on his plate, and his campaign is the easiest campaign to really fail. I'm not joking on this. It's like, if you want to play a hard Dark Elven campaign, Malekith is your choice. But if you're learning to play them, I cannot recommend them. Morathi, she is far stronger. Like, she starts close enough to Malekith, but she gets a major economic benefit due to Slaaneshi corruption. She's very powerful in battle, both in melee and as a caster. You probably would want to focus on her melee ability. And while her faction-wide benefits may not seem like a lot, she gets a much better start position in a lot of ways. Not as many enemies. Closer to, and in a position where she can take all of Ulthuan far quicker, so the elves aren't allowed to build up. That's actually a fairly significant point. You are going to have to deal with the to deal with the High Elves as Dark Elves. If you allow them to build up, they are an absolute nightmare. If you can take them out quickly, which Morathi can more so than anyone else, then it will be an easier time. Besides, your early game army is far stronger than their early game army. It's the late game situation where the roles are reversed. Hellebron, yeah, I mean, so Malekith's the worst. Morathi's kind of middle of the road. Hellebron's pretty weak herself, though she does get that slave capacity benefit and death hack benefit. But to be fair, she's not the greatest fighter. Her stats are not the best. She does have a pretty decent position where she starts, though she also has to deal with both Valkia and Sigvald potentially at the same time early on in the campaign. And for all the misery that Malekith might have dealing with Grombrindle and Valkia, Sigvald and Valkia together is probably a bit worse. So she is in her starting situation is probably safer, and she can probably play off Valkia and Sigvald off each other because they despise one another, Khorne hating Slaanesh and all that kind of stuff. But I think Hellebron's biggest problem is even Malekith has better endgame scalability than her. I've made a whole video on the Legendary Lords. Some things have changed in Zen perspective, but basically, yeah, Malekith's overall the weakest, especially because of starting position. But late game situation, Hellebron is by far in a way the weakest. She just doesn't have the same kind of endgame benefits that any of the others do, really. I mean, she does have a better starting situation than Malekith, and she does get that extra slave capacity, but she still has quite a lot of downsides, including her own personal power not being the best. In fact, I'm pretty sure her own personal, like, she's the worst Legendary Lord from a combat perspective. Lokir Felhart, he's the best, by far and away. The reason he's the best is not because he's a good combatant, though he is. He rides a Black Dragon, after all. He buffs Corsairs by a lot in his own army. He gets a special right that goes even further with that, far further than that. But crucially, and this is where the real huge tangible benefit comes with Lokir, he gets a lot of Black Arcs, far more so than anyone else, because every major port will allow the recruitment Black Arc, whereas others might spend until turn 60 to get 3 or 4 Black Arcs. You might be running with 10 plus, and the significance of that is Black Arcs can be like a mobile sea army that you can maintain for very cheap. So Lokir can maintain more armies than anyone else because of that, because he can put them on Black Arcs. And hey, if you want to fight on land close enough to the shore, yeah, just have a regular lord following a Black Arc, disembark them, have them disembark, or recruit a lord in a settlement, move the army from the Black Arc. Yes, your upkeep will go up significantly, because you'll lose that 50% upkeep reduction. But you can certainly take settlements that are close enough to the shore with that kind of game plan. And Lokir, and you can do this with any Dark Elven Legendary Lord, but Lokir makes it far better than anyone else, because he'll have a lot more Black Arcs than anyone else. He'll earn more income from sacking settlements than anyone else. Well, Malekith can with a particular skill line. He can earn double the income from sacking. But Lokir overall as a faction will earn a great deal more sacking-wise, because he's got some major benefits with that. He also has that same 5% income from slaves that Helbron does. So yeah, he's a good fighter. He has a good army. He actually focuses on the current mainline units that you should use as a Dark Elven player. He's got a lot going for himself. Malice Darkblade. He can't recruit Black Arcs in the same way as Lokir has, but he at least arts with one, which is actually a significant early game benefit. His faction benefits, I wouldn't say they're necessarily so impressive, though he can recruit the Doomstack for a lot of money, fair enough, but he can recruit the powerful Doomstack. He can either give you significant faction-wide benefits or significant battle benefits. Depends on whether or not he's possessed. He is powerful. He's by far and away the best combatant of all of them, if you allow him to be possessed by the Slaaneshi demon that's possessing him, or that's trying to possess him. But I would also argue that he has some issues. He's not quite on the same level of Lokir, I feel, overall, because Lokir is just going to have a lot more Black Arcs and all that, though. In a straight-up fight, yeah, Malice would eat all of them alive. Maybe even all at once, really. I'm not joking in that. He is that ridiculously strong. I think he was the only Legendary Lord in Warhammer 2 that could take on numerous Doomstacks on his own. Solo, really, if he was possessed. That's how ridiculous this guy could be. Rakarth, he's kind of okay. I would say he's mediocre, like in a sense, Malekith is weak. Morathi and Lokir and Malice are pretty good, with Lokir and Malice being far better than Morathi from my perspective. Morathi's no cakewalk either. Helbron's mediocre, and Rakarth is also fairly mediocre. His whole thing is focusing on monstrous units. The problem he has, he's in Lustria, far away from the Dark Elven Homeland, and yes, he's gonna have to go home, so that's an issue. And he's focusing on getting monstrous units. Monstrous units are good, and he does get the significant upkeep benefit, or upkeep benefit of 10%, but there are some problems with that. Monstrous units do have downsides in this game. Vulnerable to range if they're flying, vulnerable to anti-large overall, and Rakarth's combat ability just isn't comparable to really many of the others. He's better than Helbron, I suppose, but in terms of pure personal combat ability, but he's got some problems. He's not particularly impressive, though. He can get monstrous units. He has a chance of getting monstrous units, so he doesn't have to really recruit them normally, but rather he uses the monster pens, which gives you a chance to capture a variety of hideous beasts after a battle. So he does have some benefits with respect to that, but I don't think the game plan works especially well given what the current meta is for the Dark Elves. But that's where I stand on them. If you want a more in-depth video on the Legendary Lords, check out my guide on it. I'll link it at the end of this video. To talk about regular Lords and Heroes, you have the following choices for Lords. You've got Dreadlords with sword and crossbow, the male Dreadlord basically. You've got Dreadlords with sword and shields, the female version. The difference is that one has ranged attack, the other one has a shield, which gives them shielded, which gives them a significant chance to block small arms fire if hitting from the front. Both of them have black dragons, have the ability to get up on black dragons, and they're melee lords. They're pretty good melee lords. Then you have the High Beastmasters. The High Beastmasters get a special skill line focusing on beasts. So if I'm gonna, let me just look at the individual lords as I'm talking about them. So I have a Dreadlord over here. This is her skill line. She can go all the way to the Black Dragon. She also has some various skills over here. And all Dark Elven lords and even heroes get the ability to get at least one name of power. Either you get only one choice or you get multiple choices to pick from. So you get names of power that give you faction benefits, that improves Lord's army, combat skills, etc., and so on. And you do get choices, like you get an event that pops up, and you get different benefits dependent on what you've chosen. Speaking about the Beast Masters, though, they've got this special skill line. Now, it is kind of hilarious that Beast Masters can get Black Dragon benefits, but they can't ride the Black Dragon. They get the Chariot and they get the Manticore, which are far worse mounts than the Dreadlords have. They do get the benefit to Cold Ones, then you can get Medusae benefits. The Medusae benefit might actually be the more significant one, because Medusae are pretty good. But then you get War Hydra benefits, and then Black Dragon benefits. Personally, if I'm going to build a Black Dragon Doom stack, I'm not sure how much I care about 8 melee attack for them, to be quite honest. The recruitment duration time is pretty significant, I'm not going to lie. But at the same time, like, yeah, I would probably use a high Beastmaster to recruit the Black Dragon army, and then hand that over to a Dreadlord if I was doing that. Because, yeah, a melee defense and a melee attack is not necessarily going to matter all that much, I'd say. But the recruit rank and recruit time duration can be significant. They're probably better for the recruitment process, not necessarily for actually using them. And they're worse off than Dreadlords in a lot of ways. Not just in the amount choices, but also statistic-wise. Like, he's got 95 armor and he can't use a shield. She can use a shield, and she's got a lot more armor than him as well. And there lies the difference. And then finally, as a final lord choices, you get Supreme Sorceresses. In terms of, which are your magic lords. So instead of having a melee tree, they have a magic tree. They can ride Dark Pegasuses. What I would argue with the magic is that Lore of Shadows is probably your best choice, though Dark Magic isn't necessarily bad. Bladewind, this is what Malekith has in terms of his magic tree. It's pretty good. Like, both of these are very good. Death, Beasts, and Fire, they're okay, but not as good. But obviously the traits also matter as well. Like, Cruel, for instance, is fairly significant because it's giving you 5% income from sacking settlements. The income from raiding doesn't matter too much, but 5% from sacking settlements is significant. How do you level them? How do you level up lords? Well, and this applies to legendary lords as well, to a degree. With legendary lords, like, let's just look at Malekith. And I may not have leveled him up in the best possible way, by the way. But what you generally do is you get 1 point in Room Marcher, 1 point Inspiring Presence, and then I would always get Linebreaker. You can also get Chief Master eventually or early on, depends on what you're doing. For a Legendary Lord, I would just spend 3 points in Linebreaker and then wait until I can get their special skill line over here and some skills over here at the very top. And after you've gotten the special skills, or for a regular Lord, even before that, you might want to get some melee skills. With army skills, always focus on Linebreaker and Chief Master. The other skills are for specific units that you may not use in most regular armies, like Shades, Dark Riders, Hydras, like monstrous units, Knights, Cold One Riders. You should never use Cold Ones, by the way. Maybe Chariots, but not the regular ones. Cavalry, like, if you need Cavalry, go for monsters. If you're looking for Chariots, potentially, but I would not necessarily get Night Lord or Slaughter Lord. I don't think those units are worth it, really. Then, you know, eventually get Rally into Ravager rewards for more armor for melee units, and Stand or Die. Or the skill line, the red skill line is generally your big focus. Melee skill line as a secondary one, or the casting one as a secondary one. I would not necessarily focus too much on the melee skill line for a melee lord, but for magical lords, if they're the only caster in an army, and generally if you're recruiting a Supreme Sorceress, you're doing it for the purpose of ensuring that you have magic in an army, or you're using Magic Lord as a way to have an army that's following your main one to provide magical support. That's one way of doing it. And yeah, same principles apply. Like, for instance, for her, I think I'm gonna build up an entire army of Medusa, actually, to make use of that, because they're pretty good units. They're pretty good range units. They're pretty decent in melee as well. But I've seen Morathi use them. I fought Morathi as the High Elves, and I've seen her use these Medusa. They can be pretty scary, actually. They can do a lot of range damage in point of view. Like, you look at a missile strength, sure, of course, they're just gonna be one entity, but they're a powerful entity in their own right. Though they do take quite a bit to recruit. when it comes to lords, Dreadlords are generally going to be your bread and butter. Supreme Sorceresses, though, may be used, like, if you want a good melee lord, yeah, get Dreadlords. Ignore the other two choices, they're not great. But generally speaking, you might want to use a lot of Supreme Sorceresses, or some Supreme Sorceresses. Depends on how many regular Sorceresses you have capacity-wise. Let's talk about heroes. One of the significant benefits that you have playing the Dark Elves is this. You can get a lot of hero capacity because you don't necessarily have a lot of structures to worry about. Certainly, you don't have to worry about too many military structures, though quite a few or two of the structures to recruit heroes are also going to give you military recruitment options. This is one of the benefits. Like, your main barracks chain, which you may want, also gives you master benefits. Your Shrine of Cain, which you wouldn't use for the sake of Harganeth Executioners or Witch Elves, they give you two heroes. Like, you can get a lot of heroes very quickly if you're playing the High Elves. The Sorceresses might be the hardest one to get because or the least worthy to get. Like, the Shrine of Cain gives you Tefags and Cainite Assassins and one capacity for each. The Barracks Chain, which you want for other purposes, gives you one master each. The Sorceress building just gives you research and Sorceress capacity, so that's probably the one least worth it. But here's the thing, as the Dark Elves, because you've got Black Arcs and you really want to rely on the Black Arcs for your main recruitment, because of that, you may not care about having a lot of dedicated military structures, because with military structures at the back, yeah, you have to move the units in the front. If you're recruiting from Black Arcs at the front, then, well, you can increase your capacity at the back. Another thing to say about heroes is that Black Arcs themselves have a lot of building slots, and although these structures will not, crucially, increase hero capacity, they will allow you to recruit the heroes at a lower rank, but close to the front line. So as the Dark Elves, you can have an empire at home where you don't need building unit recruitment and you're just focusing on the economy and it's safe. For instance, over here, my core territory is safe. And I can just pump out a lot of hero recruitment structures and recruit those heroes on the front line using the Black Arcs. That's exactly what I've done here. Like, these heroes right here, a lot of these heroes have been recruited from the Black Arcs at the front, but the capacity has been increased back at home. That is a tangible benefit. Now, hero choice-wise, if we look at the choices at the Black Arc, we have the following options. We have Death Hags, Masters, Cainite Assassins, and Sorceresses. Death Hags are, out of the three melee choices, the Death Hags are the best. The reason they're the best is for one simple reason that's not necessarily going to be reflected in anything that's being said here, but the reason they're the best is for this reason. If we look at their skill tree, they give you replenishment. And when it comes to heroes in general, if you have replenishment, you spend points when you have it available, otherwise you spend points in the melee tree. I've talked about this in other race guides. It's like, always get the melee skill tree, get melee defensive available, armor if available, like in this case 3 points in Passion, 1 point to Isle Die and Foe Seeker, going to Tenacity and 1 point Fervor, then Deadly Onslaught, and then the other points, Word of Cain, Cry of War, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to spend my point in time repeating myself. But in terms of the difference between the heroes, the Death Hags are the best. Masters are second best in terms of melee heroes. Cainite Assassins, yeah, they're ranged, but they're ranged heroes and lords suck. That's why the Dreadlords with crossbows are not too important. He seems to be falling asleep, by the way, by the looks of it. In terms of the skill lines for individual heroes, like the special skill lines, and then, of course, you've got your mages, just before we forget that. Like, yeah, the magic skill tree, you're mainly getting them for magic, not other benefits. Though they can give you more items with regards to scouting. They give you a chance to get more items on the campaign map. And masters give you training. Okay, so in terms of individual heroes and their special skill lines, with Death Hags, they're kind of a glass cannon unit, though they do have a decent amount of armor, but they're vulnerable, suffice to say. What you do in their special skill trees, because you always get the choice, I would almost always take Cry of War. The reason is, not for the charge bonus, not for the leadership, but the fear. Unless you have other sources of fear, then you could potentially take Witch Brew for melee attack, armor piercing, base weapon damage, or melee attack and weapon strength. But I think Cry of War in general is probably your best choice. For the Masters, they can stimulate growth, but I would not necessarily focus on Masters using them at home from income from slaves. Unless you have a ridiculous amount, but even then, 10% income from a local province of slaves, I don't think that's going to matter. It didn't matter in Warhammer 2 because you could stack slaves in a province to a ridiculous level, and that would work, but right now, it's not too significant. Instead, I focus on training, and you don't have a choice with them. You can get all these skills. The ones I would prioritize is, however, Schemer for the control, especially useful when you're taking over a province. Weakness of Horde when you get them. Noble Born is not too important. The leadership and character are leadership less significant. I focus more even on growth, so that when you're taking over a territory and you're sacking it, you're generally going to sack it, you rebuild it faster. In this respect, the Dark Elves are a bit similar to Greenskins, because Greenskins can rebuild territories they take. They sack them, they loot them, they reduce them to level 1 or 2, but they can rebuild them very, very quickly as well. And that's kind of how the Dark Elves play. And yeah, get the Martial Name of Power at the earliest opportunity. It's going to improve his combat ability. In terms of names, like I would always focus on melee defense, for instance, melee defense or some other benefit dependent on what you're getting. It's a chance. For instance, for him, I've decided to give armor piercing damage in an area. With respect to him. He is shielded, though I don't necessarily know if all of them... Yeah, they're all shielded, okay. Alright. And that's how you deal with the Masters. As for the Knight Assassins, you're not getting them for their combat ability. Not really. Because they have low armor. They're the most vulnerable of all of them. But you can get some benefits with them. 2 benefits, or rather 3 benefits, actually. They can be hard to hit because they can get a lot of melee defense. Though not necessarily more than the others, but they can have a pretty good melee defense with Dance of Death, Elusive, all that good stuff. They can give you a loyalty benefit to accompanying lords. I generally don't talk about loyalty because it's something that typically doesn't matter, but getting that extra loyalty benefit can keep your lords more in line. But it's pretty easy to deal with loyalty. It's not necessarily too big of a problem in Warhammer 3. More so a problem when you confederate a faction rather than when you're recruiting a lord, keeping them in fight. If you keep a lord passive, yeah, they're not gonna like that. And if you do some bad decisions in events, sure. They can help with that, but it does take some levels to get Stalker. A bigger benefit, though, is to get Manbane, because, yeah, you can get some other benefits from the others, but I would say Manbane for the fear, for the bonus versus infantry is better. And then you can also get Scavenge for more post-battle loot, increasing by 15%. It's actually more than 15% if we look at this. It's 30% post-battle loot, and it's because of the Knight Assassin giving that. They can also generate slaves per turn. So for the assassins, you're gaining them more for the campaign benefits rather than the actual battle benefits. They're not too great in battle from my perspective, though. They can do some nice debuffs, like Assassin's Trophy. That can be pretty useful when you're targeting a lord. Mage-wise, same idea as with Mage Lords. Though you might also consider certain traits, like for instance, she had Cruel, so I decided to go with the Fire Mage as opposed to Shadows, as opposed to some of the other choices available there, because, yeah, getting Cruel is more important than having a specific school of magic, I'd argue. Though typically speaking, getting Dark or getting Shadows is going to be better than the other ones, but the traits also matter. I would usually, like, when it comes to magic, the only one I would really want to avoid in most cases, Beast is the least important. Dark and Shadows are best, but Fire and Death are pretty competitive, but Beast is just awful, at least from a campaign perspective. Multiplayer-wise, obviously, these kind of things are a bit different. And yeah, you level most of them up the same way, either focusing on the magic tree for the mages or the melee tree for these guys. I would not focus on post-battle loot necessarily with Scavenge or increased slave income until you've gotten some points in the melee tree for K-Knight Assassins, I would absolutely focus on training and replenishing troops for Death Hags and for Masters, instead of just spending that extra point in that. Like, because you can't always spend a point in training or simulate growth. So you do have to choose. Sometimes, very rarely, it might be worth it going full on ahead with the melee tree if you've got very difficult fights one after another, but most of the time it's just best to spend points in training, simulate growth whenever possible. Though I would not start spending points to stimulate growth until I finished getting training and have unlocked at least Foe Seeker with them. It's not the biggest priority at the start of a campaign, I feel. And that's what you do with regards to lords and heroes. Let's talk about unit recruitment. So unit recruitment wise, you're mainly going to want to recruit units from the Black Arcs, partly because of increased capacity. Like the baseline capacity at level 1 is the same as a settlement until you get to a higher level. But at level 2 of a Black Arc, it's free capacity, and going to 4 all the way to 6. So you want to recruit units from Black Arcs. You want to get the Black Arc as quickly as possible. But regardless of whether or not you're recruiting for a Black Arc or from a regular settlement, here's how I would rate things. Your mainline units, the ones that you want to get the most. Right now, with the melee meta of Warhammer 3 and the way range units have problems and all the siege battles, getting Black Arc Corsairs is your best choice. For a number of reasons. Not with hand bows, but regular melee ones. The difference between the hand bows and the regular ones is the hand bows have a ranged weapon on top of that, but they lose a certain blade. It does matter to a degree, though not too significant, I think. But here's the reason why Black Arc Corsairs are so good. There's a couple of factors that come into it. They get to see Dragon Cloak, which gives them a lot of armor. Now, of course, they're not going to get the same ability as Dread Spears. I think I have at least one Dread Spear. They're not going to get the Silver Shields of Dread Spears, for instance, that blocks a lot of missile attacks, but they have double the freaking armor. So they'll take significantly less damage, especially in melee, but even in range, they'll take, because of their armor, they won't take as a lot of damage. So Dread Spears will take less missile damage if hit from the front, but otherwise, yeah, the Corsairs are going to take less damage. They're fast. All of them are fast. They're fast, but the Corsairs have a great many stats. Anyone who's played the Greenskins knows the Nasty Skulkers from the Skarsnik DLC. The Black Arc Corsairs are essentially that without the stock ability. They're incredibly powerful. They're not as good against cavalry because they don't have the ability the Nasty Skulkers have, but aside that, they will tear infantry to shreds. They're powerful, they hit hard, they have a ridiculous amount of armor piercing damage. They have a great deal of melee attack, decent melee defense, good armor. This is the same armor that I believe Jade Warriors have. And the benefit of armor isn't just like pure battle benefit, it's also a benefit in auto-resolve. Like in this campaign, I've barely fought any battles, and even then only up against like some major strongholds or to try and preserve my entire army. But many battles in the campaign I've been able to win with auto-resolve. But the reason I've been able to do so is because I focused on Black Arc Corsairs. Armor matters in auto-resolve. It matters a great deal. It matters in terms of your chances. It matters in how damaged your units are going to be. And the units themselves are absolute wrecking balls. There's some better units in the campaign, sure, but the Black Arc Corsairs are very strong, and they're relatively cheap, sure. Things like the Dread Spears will be cheaper. Things like the Dark Shards, slightly cheaper. But getting a lot of Black Arc Corsairs at the very least can give you a significant advantage. Outside of that, what else would I recruit? Well, you can get some handbows, because at level 1, with every Black Arc, you can recruit Black Arc Corsairs and Black Arc Corsairs with handbows. However, I would not necessarily worry about the handbows. For a ranged unit, I would focus on the Dark Shards with shields. Because while that shield ability may not matter so much for a melee unit where you're trying to engage in melee very quickly and range capability is going to drop off a cliff once that happens, for range units it does matter. And Dark Shards are going to be much better at surviving at range than the handbows. But the handbows are not really a ranged unit, they're more of a melee unit with an extra range capability. That is how these guys play. That's the difference between the two of them. So if you don't have the ability to recruit Corsairs, which you won't if you're recruiting on land, but if you don't have that, I would get Dread Spears, maybe some Bleak Swords, because they're better than Dread Spears in pure melee ability, though Dread Spears will do a decent enough job. Like, if you're not using a Black Arc, you're gonna need to get the tier 3 barracks to get Corsairs and Handbows. And like Malika, for instance, he doesn't start with Black Arc, it can take him a while. Use a combination of Dread Spears and Dark Shards. Like, at tier 1 barracks, you can recruit Dark Shards without the shields. They're still good, but obviously with the shield, they're far better, especially in ranged engagements. Like, I've made Malekith go on the entire campaign map without Dark Shards or shields, but that's because I didn't want to stop and recruit them with him. I wanted to keep the momentum up, and that hasn't necessarily been too big of an issue, but generally speaking, Dark Shards with shields are better, even if they are somewhat more expensive. But your mainline army should be made up of a good number of Black Corsairs with some Dark Shards, like say 4, 6 potentially, and then eventually as you get them, Reaper Bolt Throwers. With Black Arc itself, like with both regular barracks and if I get the Black Arc, with both a regular barracks and a Black Arc, it takes until tier 3 to get a Reaper Bolt Throwers. They're not the best artillery. Well, they're good in a field battle. They're pretty decent in a field battle, but they're more like sustained damage ability as opposed to just raw a single hit just decimating an entire unit. They're not the best at taking down walls, that's for damn certain, because they don't actually have a lot of missile strength. But 2 of them in every single army, basically, unless you have like monstrous units or a Malekith to tear down walls. Having 2 Reaper Bolt Throwers in a lot of armies can give you a lot of siege capability, which is something that you'll want. In fact, for this army, I will probably switch these 2 Reaper Bolt Throwers into this one as it goes on to besiege further into Ulf 1. If I were to continue this campaign. Having 2, maybe 3, could work to just take down wall towers. You want to do it, especially when dealing High Elves, because High Elves have absolutely devastating towers. Irony is, so do the Dark Elves. Like, both Dark Elves and High Elves have incredibly good range units, and they both have some of the best wall towers in the entire game. Like, to give you an idea of how powerful those wall towers are, if you get the Dark Elven or High Elven settlement to tier 3, you're going to be attacked by multiple armies. Unless those armies have a lot of flying units to bypass those walls, they're not getting into those walls. Or very few of them are getting into those walls, and they're going to leave a trail of corpses behind. That's how powerful the tier 3 towers of Dark Elves and High Elves are by default. And you can improve them even further with the garrison building, more or less. Because you will get, you'll get better towers even then. But just a point to go there. Beyond that, what else would I focus on? Would I worry at all about the cavalry chain? No. Doomfire, you do have Doomfire warlocks, but they're incredibly squishy. They're a glass cannon unit, the ultimate glass cannon unit. They can do a lot of damage. With their lesser Doombolt, sure, they're pretty scary if they get that off, absolutely, but their low armor makes them very weak, and they don't have the best leadership either. They're a glass cannon, like, they're there to cast the Doombolt. I would not bother with the cavalry chain. Except potentially Dark Rider or Repeater crossbows, but even then, I would not necessarily be worried about doing that. Although it's worth saying that skirmisher cavalry can be useful in situations where we want to lure the enemy into attacking. Let's say we want to corner camp with our army, but you're the attacker, and you want to get the enemy to attack you. You can use magic on them, sure. But you can also use like 1 skirmisher unit of Dark Rider with crossbows, do some damage, and that will get bait the enemy into attacking you. But outside of that, Dark Riders aren't worth it. Dark Riders with shields aren't worth it. Not in single player. In multiplayer, different discussion, of course, always. I don't know what the stat situation is in multiplayer, but it is very different in single player. But outside of very limited usage of Dark Riders, Repeater crossbows, and maybe 1 Doomfire Warlock if you want the glass cannon, it's not worth spending your building slots on disables at all. Shades. Let's talk about Shades. Well, are they good? Yes. Are they worth the significant cost increase versus Dark Shards? Because you're looking at 160 free for Dark Shards with Shields versus 238 for Shades. Or comparing 160 free of Black Arc Corsairs versus Shades. Is that worth it? I don't believe so. Because when you look, Dark Shards with Shields will have lesser range, sure, a bit lesser range. They won't have stock. But you know what they will have? Once detected, and this is a pretty significant deal. Once detected, Dark Shards with Shields will perform better in a straight-up range slog than Shades will. In a melee situation, Black Arc Corsairs will perform better. I don't think, like, Shades can be good. When I played Warhammer 2 initially when it came out as Malekith, I made the full Shade army. They work pretty well, but they're just more expensive than either Dark Shards. Far more expensive than either Dark Shards to recruit and maintain the Dark Shards or Black Arc Corsairs. And they're a hybrid unit, essentially. And hybrid units tend to do less well than dedicated units. Shockingly enough, one of the best hybrid units in the entire game is actually the Black Arc Corsairs. I'm not joking. These guys can punch way above their weight. Because they've got the same missile strength as Dark Shards, right? Though they have a little more... they do have some issues, of course, because limited range and all that. So Shades, I would not necessarily bother with Shades. I would not bother with the Cavalry Chain. Witch Elves, Harganeth, no and no. Yes, Harganeth Executioners and Blackguard eventually can be worth it for not so much dealing. Well, Harganeth and Witch Elves, absolutely not. Blackguard of Nagarond, maybe. Though again, I would not bother with a lot of these structures for the sake of recruiting units. You might want to get the Palace of the Dread Knights just for that local recruitment capacity and control, sure, and Lord Recruit rank faction wide. But the actual units from there, it's like the Chariots, they're okay, but not too great. Cold Dread Knights, not worth it. I think maybe 2 of them, but if you're getting to tier 4. You can get Black Dragons, and yes, Black Dragons will be more expensive, but they'll be a lot better in a fight. And hell, even Hydras are, from my perspective, quite a bit better than Cold One Dread Knights or Cold One Charioteers. Though, don't underestimate the Chariots. If out of the units here, I would argue the Chariots are actually the best unit. Like, if Kislev has taught me anything, is Chariots with high armor, and these guys have high armor, are ridiculously good. The Cold Ones and Cold One Dread Knights, not worth it, not worth the cost, not worth the upkeep. The Chariots, maybe, potentially. The Blackguard can be useful in one role, and that is to provide you an entire large endgame unit against some of the very powerful units where the Dread Spears that you can recruit from every settlement just are not going to perform the role. But they are incredibly vulnerable to range because they don't have missile resistance nor shield. They're a good melee unit, but they're vulnerable to range, so they're less useful. What about monsters? Hydras are good. Feral Manticores, ignore they exist. Otherwise, like, yeah, I would not bother with most of the units here, except Black Knights. Like, if you want to get Chariots, it's just better to get the Cold One Chariots as opposed to the Scourge Runner Chariots, because the Cold Ones are just only slightly more expensive. And I would not bother with this building chain at all, though you do get some resources from this, so don't ignore that aspect. Harpies can be useful, but yeah, with glass cannons again, and they don't have a lot of cannon either. They're just really fast. Can be useful in taking down towers very quickly, though, if you want to focus on that. I would get Hydras and I would get Black Dragons out to the monstrous units, but and potentially maybe get some shrines, or at least one shrine in an army if you can get it to tier 5. Like at tier 5, yeah, Black Dragons, shrines, Cold One Chariots, Hydras can be worth it. But the mainstay of your armies for most of your campaign is gonna be made up of free units, or maybe 4. Black Arc Corsairs, Dark Shards with Shields, Regiments of Renown, of course, Reaper Bolt Throwers, and maybe a couple of Dread Spears to give you some flank protection and large anti-cavalry protection, because Black Arc Corsairs are not the best units at it, though they will handle themselves quite well against most of the early game cavalry and even mid-game cavalry that's available in the game. Less so against chariots and monsters, though, so you might want to have some Dread Spears to help you out with that. But that's what you do in terms of recruitment. Focus on Black Arcs. Focus on recruiting the Black Arc Corsairs from those Black Arcs. Get eventually Reaper Bolt Throwers, Dark Shards, and some Dread Spears to support that. Or early on as you're starting a campaign, like any settlement will allow you, like let's say I get a Lord over here, right? You can do something like this, get 2 Dread Spears, start recruiting 2 Dread Spears, and then, you know, get 2, 3, 4, however many Black Arc Corsairs, and that's how you do recruiting. Like, you know, get 4 Dread Spears and 8 Black Arc Corsairs, eventually get Dark Shards to support that. The Black Arcs do give you the ability to get Black Arc, Dark Shards with shields at tier 2. Kind of feels a bit pointless to even have the regular Dark Shards when you can recruit Dark Shards with shields. Yeah, it's almost for the income more, but damn if that's absolutely not worth it for the ranged units. Those shields are fairly substantial and fairly significant. Those shields allow you to... You won't outrange the High Elves, but you'll certainly outshoot them. You have the army as the Dark Elves to absolutely decimate anything that the High Elves can throw against you early on. Later on, it's a different discussion. They may have some better endgame options than you do. But early on, you are going to have an army that absolutely decimates them. And actually holds their own against the vast majority of armies that are available to players in the early game. I think only the Warriors of Chaos, in terms of quality of units, I think only the Warriors of Chaos have better quality units than the Dark Elves. Greenskins as well with Nasty Skulkers can do very well, though keep in mind, in a straight up fight, I would probably put my money on the Black Arc Corsairs winning that engagement, because more armor, even if they aren't capable of doing the sheer ridiculous damage that the Nasty Skulkers can, they just have other statistics that are pretty good, though Nasty Skulkers have a great deal of armor piercing, so it would be interesting to see that kind of engagement. But yeah, that's all there is to say when it comes to unit recruitment. Finally, the research tree. The way this research tree works is you have to unlock each branch and then move on to the next. After doing the 4 main parts of it. So for instance, if you want to upgrade 1, you have to get Founded on Tyranny, Battle is Business, Driven by Vengeance. But what should you prioritize in this particular tree? Beyond the 4 main in each branch to be able to move on eventually to upgrade 3. Well, here's what I would argue. One of the first ones you should get is Founded on Tyranny. The 10 growth will be very useful early on in your campaign in order to grow your settlements. Especially because you will have worse growth because of your poor public order. Now, the Dark Elves do have good growth, undeniably so, but because of the poor control, that is going to affect their growth. So Founded on Tyranny will help them out, especially if you combine it with Revel and Suffering, which gives you 15 additional growth. Though I find that by the time I can get Revel and Suffering, I no longer have issues early on in my campaign. So what do I choose? Well, I get Founded on Tyranny, then I get Battle as Business. Dark Elves, as I've mentioned throughout this video, do rely on post-battle loot, sacking, etc. So 10% income from post-battle loot is very useful. Especially when you get Chartered Piracy, which gives you 5% upkeep benefits to Black Arc Corsairs and 20% income from sacking settlements. So that will vastly increase the amount of money you're getting from sacking settlements. Of course, you're also going to need to get Driven by Vengeance to get upgrade 1. Beyond that, in the first branch over here, I would get continuous slave supply just for those 15% casualties post-battle, so you can get more slaves from the battles you're fighting. That's what it affects. The post-battle options with how many slaves you're going to get. After that, I will not necessarily bother too much with all of this. There are some benefits, but they're not really too substantial over here. The 5 leadership kit could be useful, but it's worth it more to move on to upgrade 1. Get tempered. When you move on to upgrade 1, get Broken by Lash, and get Daylight Denied as well. Income from slaves can be really nice, or more importantly, get Forged to Kill to get reworked crossbows. Though Daylight Denied, 3% income from slaves and 15% income from iron mines, gold mines, stone quarries can be pretty good to actually have in your faction. Though of course in the upgrade one, the one that's most important is Reward Crossbows, giving you that significant ammunition and range bonus for your Dark Shards, Black Arc Corsairs, Shades, and Dark Rider units. But really, for the Dark Shards and maybe the Black Arc Corsairs. And of course you're going to get weapon strength and missile strength for your units. And of course Tempered in Blood. Basically, Tempered in Blood with Daylight Denied, that's 6% income from slaves. Quite significant when you add everything, start adding everything up. But really in the first branch, in upgrade 1, it's the main upgrades that are actually the best. Black Arc Growth is useful. Tempered in Blood is useful. The speed less so, but the weapon strength from Force to Kill is pretty good. The other stuff is not quite as important. Moving on to upgrade 2. This is where you start getting local recruitment capacity increases, all provinces. Very useful, very important. Black Art of Nagarond, no, it's not important at all. Or if it is important, it's important much later on in your campaign. However, you can get from an Instrument of War, you can get, and you'll have to get Instrument of War anyway to get upgrade 3. You can get Walking in Darkness. 10% campaign movement range is a pretty big deal. Consumed by Rivalry, I mean, the problem with the research tree, one of the things that you could really benefit from is control. The problem is there's only a few control research options over here, like Exploit Feuds, +1, Consume by Rivalry, another +1. In fact, in terms of commandments, you probably are going to use Demand Highborn Hostages the vast majority of times, because that's also going to help your growth. Though if you want to grow a province very quickly, you can increase slave production quota, though of course that's going to consume slaves per turn. And there's already a lot of ways you're going to consume slaves. Beyond that, I would not, like when I'm looking at upgrade 2, compared to moving on to the final tree, here's what I will argue. In upgrade 3, how much would you want to linger? Well, Hardship and Cruelty Ping can be great, especially because you can get a lot of Lords and Heroes. So 5 melee defense can be pretty good, but it's not too important. And I would argue that a lot of the stuff outside the campaign movement range over here and armor isn't necessarily worth it. But 10 armor for Black Arc Corsairs, increasing that armor to 90 would be really good. Armor for Dark Shards essentially could be useful, especially because they have a fairly low level of armor anyway to begin with. So you're moving from 30 or a bit higher than that. You're moving that up by 10. Wow. That can be really good to have. And then finally, upgrade 3. More Black Arc Growth. More Black Arc Growth over here. What you always want to look at is what are you going to get for what you're unlocking. And when I'm looking at the final tree, the only one that I really see as being absolutely worth it is this one. Deadly Accountability. Like I would try and maybe get upgrade 3 quickly so I can get up Walking in Darkness, sure, and pressed into Servitude. But after that, I would not necessarily focus too much, except obviously the Black Arc benefit. I would not necessarily focus too much on that beyond getting upgrade 3 itself over here, because a lot of these benefits aren't necessarily too significant, though of course income from slaves can be useful, but by this point you may want to worry about other stuff. Though yeah, you can get income from slaves and get Deadly Accountability. The other stuff over here, until you get those units like Blackguards and all that, until you're starting to mass them, it's not really worth bothering here. 2 recruit rank for your heroes is not really significant, unless you get a lot of other benefits as well. But the thing is, you're going to benefit far more from recruiting your heroes on the front line, which means that they're going to be lower rank than recruiting them in your home province. Though, of course, one of the counter arguments to that particular perspective is you could, get a high level, get this to tier 5 and get rank 7 sorceresses, and there's other ways to increase those kind of ranks. But Here's the thing, Sorceresses being a high rank, yeah, it's useful, it's nice, but that's not really what you're particularly interested in. There's some other benefits, like this one, for Hardship and Cruelty, this one would be worth it more, because getting K-Knight Assassins to a higher rank means you can get potentially quite a few K-Knight Assassins, with some other benefits, of course, tied together, and maybe get K-Knight Assassins to a high enough level. Like over here, I can, if I look at K-Knight Assassin Recruitment, I can already get them level 5. If we're looking at the K-Knight Assassin level 5, if I could get them in, that would give me quite a few slaves over here. And that's the point where you might benefit from potentially getting quite a few of these guys in your home province to, you know, just increase your hero production, your slave production. Or potentially getting a lot of masters if you can increase your master's rank. Though there's not necessarily anything, from what I can see, that gives you a master rank. If you could get a higher master rank for any research, that would be great, but there isn't, from what I can see, anything that would buff them. So I would certainly say, going back to it, get Founded by Eternity, continuous slave supply, then move back. Get Founded by Eternity, then battle as business, into charter piracy, then continuous slave supply, then finally driven by vengeance, move on to upgrade 1, get tempered in blood, and then daylight denied, or you can just get forged to kill into reward crossbows. Depends on what you need more in your campaign. Do you need that army strength, or do you need the economic strength more? That will decide what you're going to go for. With upgrade 2, obviously increasing the capacity of the recruitment capacity, pretty important stuff. But outside of that, the only one that's really worth it is the campaign movement range. Yes, the upkeep benefits aren't insignificant, very true enough. But I would get instead the Instrument of War, Walking Darkness, get the other two, obviously Present Servitude, then the Walking Darkness, or Walking in Darkness directly. Depends on what you need more in that situation. If you've got a lot of black arcs and you're using them mainly to recruit, the Present Servitude is not quite as important. And upgrade 3, when we're looking at upgrade 3, I don't really see a huge amount over here that would be worth going for, except for deadly accountability. The other ones, I would argue, are not worth it at all. Unless you're getting, like, you know, executioners or a lot of black card. But even then, I would argue that there's bigger benefits that you can get for your armies that can benefit you a bit more, like, you know, marching to war, for instance, that I've skipped over. And that's all there is to say. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications. Again, as I've said at the beginning of the video, I am looking to do a series on improving player campaigns. So if you're interested in me taking a look at your campaign, giving you some tips, helping you out, please send it via the email in the description below. Stay tuned for more, boys and girls.